I am really honored to be here, really honored to share the space with a friend who I met at Warren Wilson and was one of the, I guess I made a lot of really good friends at Warren Wilson, but I think in the nature of a 10-day residency program, it's very difficult to make lasting connections with people you only see 20 days a year. So Keanu is definitely one of the few people who I was able to build a camaraderie with, and so I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for it to be Malaprops because I think one of the things that y'all probably know is that Warren Wilson students will always go to Malaprops either on our day off or before we leave or while we're waiting for the airport. And so I've spent many days like hunting multiple book sections. I remember getting a coupon from Malaprops to go to the used bookstore down the street. So I really enjoy and am grateful to be in this space with y'all here. I can't wait till we get to do this stuff in real life again. So I am recovering from some things, so I won't be able to be on camera, but I will be playing footage from some Palestinian artists while I read. I only was able to find 4 videos, and so I wanted to speak to that a little bit. These are very short clips. They will run on loop while I read. And so the artists are Ahmed Hamad, who is a Debka performance artist and videographer, and the other the visualizations are from an artist named Dana Dur, Durr, who is also who is a visual artist herself and does a lot of animation work. So those will play while I read, and I'll speak a little bit more to why I was limited to 4 videos later on, but let's get into some stuff. So. And thank you again, Stephanie, for the kind introductions. All right, let me share my screen. Can y'all see the screen? I think you're all muted.
We're not seeing there it is. Thanks,
no.
Tarek.
Yep, cool. So these will just play while I read. The summer my cousin went missing. I should have asked how her khalta was holding up, but I knew where she would be, her body weary and unkind, buried in the day's tasks, back turned to the home she grew up in, seeds in the farm soil like miracles sprouting as she tends to them. Is this not always the case? Child upon child goes, and someone's mother is no longer a mother. My aunt, a mother herself, looks for a moment away. Nothing she plants has roots long enough to hold. She turns back anyway, looks ahead. If we are too caught up in the end, like boys fleeing from the day's news, eyes worried about that which we cannot control, however will we stay fed? However will we live long enough to grieve? Harb, which in Arabic means strife. When peaked boys be a bone, be a tantrum, a cracked tome of discipline exercising itself into the backs of boys we had no business putting our fists inside of. I tried so hard to find myself in the spines of the men who wronged me. As told by my mother, all good is holy, while evil finds itself in those who do not sleep, those who lie awake learning to write and heed and pray in me, this wired thing. My father did all he could to be sure I was birthed with a beating fist to go with those sleepless beasts, my lungs. To this day, we find a book of versed calligraphy is the prettiest flesh to make a lamb of. This is what I'll tell my son when he's beckoned by the bully in him. If his scorn loses sight of its prey, if my son develops a taste for blood, I'll blame it on the enemies of my father's enemies and our ancestors. One day he will ask me about the red in the river of our name and where it turned. When he does, I will have the same answer I did when my parents told me to hold my tongue and cleanse my fistful heart. I do not know what to throw away when nothing belongs to me. I apologize in advance, y'all. So one of the things I'm recovering from is from some sinuses and a broken deviated septum. So it's been hard to read and hard to speak, but I wanted to not miss this opportunity to read with the homie. So hopefully the footage is a nice little thingy. But I wanted to speak to it a little bit. I'm not sure if people are familiar, but I'm Palestinian. Specifically, my family's from Gaza, and we are currently facing a lot of strife from the occupation that is happening there. And so, I really wanted to showcase a lot of the work from Palestinian artists in this moment. But one of the things, and what I spoke to a little earlier, is that it's very difficult to Google anything that says, Palestine beautiful, Gaza beauty, because often if you do look up just the word Gaza or Palestine, we are inundated with a lot of scenery and footage of the destruction that has befallen my peoples. And so it was really hard to find work that is not directly or in some way speaking to the violence that befalls us. But also, more importantly, I think it's very difficult to find lengthy works, right? I was trying to find something that would last 15 minutes while I read. That wasn't really easy. But the beautiful thing is, I find that many artists, many of us who have dealt with marginalization, who have dealt with struggle and strife, are able to produce some of the most beautiful work. And while I wasn't able to find beautiful scenery from Palestine or Gaza, I was able to find quite beautiful and powerful art from my fellow artists. And I think, all of us, Tiana and myself, many people can attest to the ways in which our communities are able to be resilient in the face of so many things that happen to us. But one thing I do think often as a Palestinian, as a person of color, as somebody who has navigated multiple different intersections of violence towards this body, I think a lot of times we get caught up in the idea of existing as a feat in and of itself. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think in Palestinian lore, we speak often about existing is to resist, that by simply being alive, we are combating our erasure, which I think is a beautiful thing. But I also strive for us to not just want to exist. I think that we deserve to thrive, whether we be Black Lives in America, Indigenous lives here in America, or Torah Island specifically, or Palestinians abroad, or anybody really anywhere facing any kind of ostracization. So this poem is called We Already Know This, and it opens with the two lines, there is more to us than what was taken from us. A place to call home, land of olive trees and their branches, Palestine, Palestine. There, I've said it. I want to be sure everyone knows from where my parents hail. Each of us needs a place to return to. Genocide, I would hope everyone knows, did not start and did not end at the Holocaust. I haven't forgotten that everyone needs a place on this planet, and I prefer to live where I can leave the doors unlocked, or live without the doors, or hell. I don't even care for walls, but I do care for the blues, water, the sadness that comes when it is not within sight. I don't know if there is a child anywhere on this earth that wasn't at least once held by their mother. Water, where my mother held me until I was given to land, oh firm land, how my father holds me. People keep calling for blood, to dress you in it. I don't think any of them know truly how much of it the body can take, how much of it the body can lose. So, what can we read here? So I think there are a lot of different things I could read. I, as a person who has a beard and travel quite a bit, wrote this one poem that I think was kind of a joke, but also not a joke, called Political Poem, which kind of spoke to the ways in which I think there was a big conversation a couple years ago about like what is a political poem, what isn't a political poem, what makes our work political or not. I would argue that everything is in some way political and charged in some way. The ability to choose what to speak about or not speak about in and of itself has power. So this poem is called Political Poem. It's a little bit funnier to read, but whatever. It's one sentence long. Blessed be the Transportation Security Administration, agent for, after flagging my red duffel bag at the airport, allowing me, who in the winter months is a rather light-skinned Arab American, upon several minutes of careful debate, to keep my organic coconut oil so that I, despite having bought the container from a certain Midwest superstore's baking section, might apply this essential moisturizer to my thirsty skin, because it is quite abundantly clear the contained substance is safe, solid at room temperature, and, when in its purest form, white. And I'll just close out with two more poems and cede way to Tiana, who is a baller when it comes to poetry and just like a dear friend. So this poem is after Lucille Clifton, called I Choose Not To, or I Chose Not To. I chose not to get help. I've arrived at a man draping himself in the wardrobe of the dead. I watched this scene become my life, the way a hatchling leaves a nest, young until youth is shed by the hunger for a calm belly. How many children never to return flutter into the offing? I wake up and I pray for everything that has not tried to kill me. Feeling blessed, I pray for everything that has tried and failed. I pray for everything. A body that has as a weapon only wielded hands. A body that has only ever failed to claim a life, including its own. And this last poem will be, I'm not sure if people are familiar, but in Arab culture, we drink a lot of tea. And so we also grow a lot of like mint leaves in our backyards. And so the traditional custom is for my mom to yell at me to go get mint leaves from behind our house in the backyard. And my customary response is to say later. And then she would customarily guilt me hardcore by saying she doesn't want them anymore, which is funny because she asked for them a second before. And so she clearly needs the mint leaves. I have clearly let her down. And nobody ethers you harder than a mom who wants you to do something and you fail to do it. So this is called I Go to the Backyard, pick mint leaves for my mother. And there's a lot of, I think for me, the importance of this poem and why I like to close out with this poem all the time is because of the importance of being able to return home and being able to return to not a place that is existing just as a space, but a place that exists as an ideal, that exists as the best version of itself. Because I think a lot of times, as a Palestinian, as somebody who fights for liberations of all peoples, it's one thing to say that I want a free Palestine, but when I say free Palestine, we don't mean a free Palestine for Arabs or a free Palestine for any one ethnic group or any one religion. When people fight for a free Palestine or a free anything, I think our goal is to fight for a land that is free for all peoples. Because if we're able to liberate one community, I think that opens the door and greases the wheels for us to liberate all communities. So I think a little page out of Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, which is "We're not all free. We're not free till we're all free." And I think that if we're going through all this labor to free people, I think we have some beautiful rhetoric in place and some beautiful systems that we can be building that truly create space for all peoples to exist cohesively, coherently, in unison together. I go to the backyard to pick mint leaves for my mother. Today, my mouth fell wide when I saw the light slip into the hills and those boys I grew up with did not come back. Or so I hear. Mom would often ask me to gather the mint leaves from behind our home, and so I would leave for this nectar. Without it, there's nothing sweet to speak of. I pray that when I am gone, my people speak as sweetly of me as I do of them. I see us often, steeped in the land, and hope that a shore remains a shore, not a place to become yesterday. The girls have joined the boys now, all of them tucked just beyond the earth. But I know they wouldn't run from their mothers, not without a fight, a chase, a hunt, a honey, a home for the tea to settle, a haven for us to return to. Thank you all.
That was so beautiful, Tariq. Thank you so much for your reading and for sharing the virtual stage with me this evening. And thank you to Stephanie and Malaprops for hosting us. This is the 12th and final reading in my virtual book tour, and it's been such a joy and so lovely to get to see and read alongside so many friends. Like Tariq said, we met while getting our MFAs at Warren Wilson College, which is in Swannanoa, right next door to Asheville. So I'm so glad that we're able to join for this reading in particular tonight. I too have spent some afternoons in the Malaprops bookstore, and I look forward to being able to go back in person, hopefully someday very soon. So I'm going to be reading from my new book, Cleave, that just came out this April. Cleave is a special word because it's a contronym, which means that it has opposite meanings. It means both to cut and to cling. So some other examples of this are dust, right? You can dust on and off, or execute, which can mean both to carry something out and to kill it. So I think words like this, these like lexical contradictions, I find just so juicy. And I think it so perfectly captures what I was trying to explore in my book as a transnational, transracial adoptee. I think for me, my birth was my first experience with loss. And through my poems, I'm considering what it means to cling to that which has severed you. I'm going to start with a poem that gets its title from the Korean name I was given when I arrived in the United States. And it's a name that I really struggled with for a long time. And through the course of writing the poem, I finally found the courage to reclaim it and to think of it as an active part of who I am and not just a Korean ghost who haunts me. I'm going to share my screen for this as well. Moon Young-shin. Written on the white slip at the bottom of a Polaroid cut off by the frame, a name. Many years passed before I learned surnames come first in Korea. I rode my bicycle in circles around this reversal. For years, my skin leaped from shadow to shadow. I drank the darkness, or the darkness drank me, but what's the difference when your veins are full of haunting? One day I will walk the narrow streets of many cities full of ice, freshly frozen. I will hike through forests of windstorms newly risen. I will learn and forget the names of many trees, of tea leaves plucked too early in the season. I will orbit the earth like a moon, searching for its shadow. Where does a moon find its planet? Or is it the other way around? To be a recently hatched egg moon, curved shell pinned to the sky. I've spent my whole life in orbit of other people's light, celestial satellite in ceaseless wane. How much can you learn from a stranger's surname? A young animal crawls its way out of the womb, stretches its legs, and feels cold for the very first time. So I love Tarek's book, How the Water Holds Me, and I've been spending a little bit of time with it this week in preparation for our reading and sharing space together. And there's so many poems about family and particularly relationships between men and family. So I thought I'd read this poem that I wrote about my father. For almost a decade, my father was the primary caretaker for several dying people in his family. First my aunt, then my grandmother, then my great aunt, and finally my grandfather. And watching him take this all on, I realized how hard it is to make time to process one's own grief when everyone else is suffering around you. So this poem is about a dream I had, imagining my father trying to balance all of this. The night I dreamed of water. A man in a boat scoops water, one rounded palm at a time. His hands are porous. He sticks the tip of his tongue out of the corner of his mouth like a turtle. The water rises. It is my father. He is carrying my elderly aunt across his shoulders like a yoke. She is wailing. Her hair is stormy, but her clothes are matching. We are in her 93rd Street apartment. I can smell her skin on the pillowcases. Flowers are wilting off the wallpaper. Her silk scarf whirls in the wind. I collect the parched petals, curve my hand like the bent bottom of a boat. Petals leak through my fingers. The water continues to rise. There is no boat, just a man scooping water with his hands, front to back, side to side. So many of the poems in Cleave are in conversation with the social psychologist Harry Harlow, who was famous for his studies on attachment and relationships between caregivers and children. And he did this research primarily with baby rhesus monkeys, most famously taking them away from their mothers and presenting them with two surrogate options, one mother of cloth and one of wire, in order to study the impact of contact, comfort, and cuddling and nurturing had on the monkey's psychological development. And as you might imagine, the monkeys with cloth mothers developed at a more typically well-adjusted rate than the ones with wire mothers, who were more socially anxious and often withdrawn. And also sometimes they would give the wire mother the food and like nutrients and nourishment, and then see which one the monkey would choose. And more often than not, that the monkey preferred the contact, comfort, and nurturing of the cloth mother over the food of the wire mother. So I'm going to read 3 poems that consider different forms of mother through this lens. Mother of cloth. During hurricanes, my body tucked tightly under blankets and eyes illuminated by the pale luster of a plastic nightlight, you drew curlicues along my spine with your index finger, patted my back to the beat of rain pounding on the window. When there's a storm, it means they're bowling in heaven. Claps of thunder are balls tossed down the lane. Each flash of lightning means an angel just got a strike. We would count the seconds between thunder. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. And I'd shudder in my sheets, hands clasped in prayer, begging God to hurry up and end the party. You wrapped my body in cloth, held my hand until you felt the fingers loosen and fall. The next time I woke, I called your name, and you would come. You always came. Mother of rock. The familiar clack of shoes against tile, click of the key in the lock, wait and rock. Your gaze silent and grim. I long for the touch that doesn't come. My tongue caught on my mouth's cage, tart with sour milk. In the picture from your wedding, a white dress of lace. As if held down by the weight of fancy fabric, your bones ache to float off the edges of the frame. Mother of stone, teach me the temperature of tomb. Watch me chase my tail. Toss me a cloth, a bottle of milk. Mother of wire. If I had a choice, mother of wire, barbed and wombless, my mouth poised to pucker. I tried my best given the tools I had, you say. Where were you while I crouched in the corner, a nest of shadows? Bring out the hammer, mother. The statue of the Virgin Mary illuminates my nightstand. I touch, 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 kiss her foot, soaked in snake's blood, splattered spots of red acrylic. In the dictionary of childhood illnesses, I seek symptoms that fit my unraveling. Hair falling in clumps on the couch, tiny meticulous hands counting each strand. Call me Rhesus, young and moonless, monkey without a cloth to dust her bones. This next poem, I also think is a kindred poem to Tarek's work, thinking out what he was talking about earlier around, it shouldn't just be about survival, right? We deserve to thrive. I grew up in a very white, very conservative Catholic suburb in New York. And growing up, I never considered myself an immigrant, I think in part because of widespread anti-immigrant xenophobia that surrounded me. But as an adult, I've been able to recognize that although my immigrant story isn't the most typical, I still migrated here from elsewhere. And there's a certain kind of resiliency and solidarity that immigrants share in that journey. This poem was written to honor that sense of survival and also with the goal of thriving. Migrant. Of an animal, especially a bird, a wandering species whom no seas nor places limit, a seed who survives despite the depths of hard winter, the ripple of a herring steering her band from icy seas to warmer strands. To find the usual watering places, despite the gauze of death that shrouds our eyes, is a breathtaking feat. Do you ever wonder why we felt like happy birds brushing our feathers on the tips of leaves? How we lifted our toes from one sandbank and landed, fingertips first, on another? Why we clutched the dumb and tiny creatures of flower and blade and sod between our budding fists? From an origin of buried seeds emerge these many-banded dagger wings. We of the sky, the dirt, and the sea, we the 7-league booters and the little by littlers, we transmigrated souls will prevail. We will carry ourselves into the realms of light. Since this is my final stop on my virtual tour, I thought I'd read a poem that I haven't read yet so far during this this series. This poem is called The Last Straw, and in it, it's about, it borrows language from the article, which is titled, quote, US woman put adopted Russian boy on one-way flight alone back to homeland, unquote, which happened in April. The article was published in April in 2010 and tells the story of this Russian adoptee who came to the United States and was subsequently relinquished when he was 7 years old and sent back to Russia with a one-way ticket by himself with a note pinned literally to his coat for when he arrived. The poem is called The Last Straw because it was considered the last straw in a series of tragedies that occurred related to Russian-US adoption and resulted in a temporary freeze on Russian adoptions to the United States. And in the poem, I borrow language from the article, which featured snippets of a letter that his adoptive mother had written. The Last Straw. Little boy in a yellow jacket, stinger pinned to the zipper on his chest, a note written in a hand, not his own, Russia bound. After giving my best, for the safety of, who belongs to whom? How do we dance without the proper shoes? He drew a picture, the carousel of abandonment endlessly spinning, of our house burning. How many splinters does it take to start a fire? I was lied to, misled by a fuse, a body, pleas for water, nothing but matches. So the center part of my book is features poems that kind of consider instances of mass adoption on an international scale. And so this next poem is about Operation Baby Lift, which at the end of the Vietnam War, as American military was leaving, not only were they packing up all of their military equipment, they were also scooping up children. And this is not a unique experience. In fact, this is a recurring occurrence, particularly after instances of American occupation and war, where children are just swooped and gathered and transported and later given up for adoption. In Cuba, it happened after the Cuban Revolution. It happened in Guatemala at the end of the series of wars that the United States instigated there. And in this case, in Vietnam, a lot of these women were actually promised that they would reunite with their children once they later in America, and that never happened. So this poem has an epigraph. Quote, "We bucket brigade loaded the children right up the stairs into the airplane," unquote. Colonel Bud Traynor. Operation Baby Lift. April 4th, 1975, skin still wet with mother's grief. I brought my baby to them, I admit it. Airlift takes off, tucked in cardboard and stowed, 2 to each seat. At 23,000 feet, systems fail. In the event of being born in a country ravaged by war, explosion. I heard rumors that mixed babies would be burned alive, retaliation for consorting with the enemy, split cables, save, rescue, liberate, descends. I asked about the papers. How will I find her? How will we reunite in America? Skids and rice patty, in the event their skin is soaked in gasoline. 4:45 p.m., those who didn't fit would make the trip in the cargo area. Crosses Saigon River, under the circumstances, the evacuation became necessary. Thrashes trench, the promise of reunion too appealing to pass up. Fractures in 4, jam-packed flock. Throng of new bones. Fuel ignites. It was no longer a choice. 50 adults, the only option, and 78 children. I think I forgot to mention that the first plane that left with Operation Baby Lift crashed soon after takeoff, and yet they continued. So I'm gonna read one more poem before Tarek and I start chatting. I think more than anything for me, writing this book was a way to take ownership over my own story and to tell it on my own terms. This last poem, I kind of imagine a new like mythic origin story for myself, because as an adoptee, there's just so much mystery unknown related to where we come from. So this is a reimagining of that. Revisionist history. The weather in Seoul in October is bright and balmy. All the hospital beds are full, and women with thick arms and bent knees, feet in the stirrups, scream in an echoing symphony. A woman with small ankles can't see beyond her bloated stomach. She keeps her eyes shut as forceps dig, doctor's hands twisting between her legs like a corkscrew pulling out the plug. It's been a busy morning, and between heaving breaths, she wonders, how much longer? First the head, then the shriveled body, bright as a small sun. For the first time in her life, she sighs and means it. That's how it happens in my fantasy. The movie I watch on repeat, reimagine myth of my birth, no. I emerge from sea foam, flapping my tail fins in the Pacific froth. I washed ashore encased in a mermaid purse, crawled on all fours and learned the power of breath, no. I was stardust, an accumulation of space matter falling to earth in tiny pieces. I'm still gathering my limbs, they're scattered all over the planet. None of that is true. I was born in the airport, propelled through the gaping mouth of sliding glass doors. My father's second cousin ferried me down the stairs, my mouth bubbling with Korean consonants, eyes still wary of sight. In the video recording of my arrival, the airport light burns everything so yellow, it's purple. My grandfather's cheeks behind his glasses glow like round speckled eggs. I've watched the video so many times, it's etched like a scar. I can feel my mother's yellow tears fall purple on my cheek. My father tucks his upper lip inside his tongue. Years later, I will learn why he does this, searching for words when the mouth is lacking, soft tears cradled in the pockets of his open eyes. What's the difference between memory told and memory burned? I was born in the womb of a stranger, my face a reflection of somebody else's shadow. If I told you that I missed you. Would you believe me? Would I? Thank you. Tarek, are you there?
Yeah, I was clapping.
Yay.
Does that not sound like clapping? Sorry.
Thank you so much for reading with me, even though you're, ghostly voice.
I'm just the ethereal creature.
I had a question for you to start. And if anybody that's watching wants to send questions, please write them in the chat and they'll be communicated to us. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how being an activist and a community organizer informs your writing process and your poetry.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I've also been always thinking about, or at least in the past several years, I've thought a lot about what it means to be an activist versus an organizer. I think, and I don't want to knock activists, so please, people assume this with the most generous interpretation. But I think to be active is very much that. It's this idea and this notion of acting on impulses or acting in a very like confined time and space. So for example, I think of activists as people who might go to a protest or people who might post on something, but I don't think it's the same work as organizing, which I think is a more involved process. Like when I think of organizers, I think the work that needs to be done to enable us to be able to have a protest, to be able to have goals, and to be able to chant specific things, to have specific items that we're working to protest towards, is the work an organizer often creates space for. So, it's one thing for us to protest for Black Lives Mattering. It's another thing entirely for us to be invested in having community meetings, having forums, discussing with different people on the ground and in policymaking positions and whatnot. That's the work of organizing. And so for me, I think when I was younger, I was more of an activist because I saw my poetry as a way to build awareness and bring stories to light in terms of what it means to talk about certain things. But that felt very activist to me because I can definitely tell a story. I can definitely reach many people with this story. But if I'm not engaged and I'm not invested in the communities in a way that is more than just a fly on the wall, I think that my poetry suffers, my storytelling suffers, and my ability to actually move people forward will also suffer, because I've seen a lot of situations where people who may or may not rightly identify as activists, they will speak from their own lens, their own spaces, in a way that I think absolves them of a lot of responsibility, but also in doing so offers a very like superficial or surface level understanding of what it means to exist and thrive in the world. So I use Black Lives Mattering as an example because I think a lot of people talk about Black Lives Mattering, but they don't actually fundamentally understand like the anti-Blackness in the world. They don't understand the ways in which policy for decades upon decades has created a situation where our Black kin are under attack. And so it's one thing to post a Black square. It's another thing entirely to be able to be invested in the work. And I think a lot of people can tell a story, but it's much when you are actually in the community, actually in meetings, actually talking to people, as opposed to just seeing stories unfold on the internet, I think you get a much deeper understanding of the level of work involved and the stakes, I think, involved for liberation for anybody. So for me, I think, and this is the weird thing too, I don't think I've actually written a poem since Warren Wilson. I've not, well, at least I haven't finished a poem since Warren Wilson. And because for me, at first, I started writing as a writer, first and foremost, because I felt like it was up to us to tell our own stories. But then as I grew and I got more inundated in the community work, I saw myself more as a community organizer who happens to write. And so for me, writing is journalistic. Writing is this way to tell the stories that aren't being told. But I ultimately use it as kind of a barometer or a kind of like marker for the work I'm trying to do. So I often tell people, like, if I could give up writing, I would, if it meant that if I never had to write another poem again about, like, I think Tiana, you mentioned this a little earlier, which was like, hopefully I don't have to keep writing poems like this or things about like, babies and children and like this kind of like messed up nature of like the world. And so it's like, if I could stop having to write poems about people being killed or people being like ostracized or occupied, I would totally trade that in for that to never happen again. And so I think that's kind of where my writing changed. Like I stopped writing because I think writing stopped being just a storytelling function for me. It started being a world imagining function for me. And so if I'm able to achieve the world I want to see, I don't know if I have a purpose for writing. But then, like, that's me being a cynic. I'm sure I'll find beautiful reasons to write. It's just right now it's very inundated with like these very heavy reasons. So I
Yeah.
think that's just the mode I'm in.
But I don't think either of us are the kinds of poets that will just like write a poem about a flower, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I like the idea what you're saying, because like about how you differentiate between being an activist and being an organizer, because they both have a role, right? They're different roles, and I kind of equate it in terms of writing as like an activist maybe is like the kind of writer will write just one draft of a poem and then like that's it, whereas like an organizer is like that commitment to like the inundation or the immersion into the craft, into like to watching something kind of evolve over time.
Right.
There's that yeah, that sparked me in thinking about those connections.
So I don't know if I should ask you a question directly back, but I guess without trying to like air too much stuff out. But you know, we've done a lot of organizing type work, especially in academia, and so I'm not gonna like put you on the spot or anything, but I guess an example, whether you want to use examples from the shared space that we had or others, I guess like I'm curious because I know we met because a lot of the stuff we shared was like a similar approach to the world around us, being POC, being people who are in like marginalized space. And so I guess my question for you is like, how do you similarly approach your work? I know that I think for me, right, I'll just speak to myself and you can like riff on this. When I went to Warren Wilson and we did that, the Writers of Color group, for me, it was like, I felt like I had to do that work. It was like work that I felt like you can't be a person of color and not be doing this work because if you don't, you're not setting the foundation for the people after you to be there. But then I think there's a certain point where both of us, at least for myself, I was just kind of like, why am I doing this? Like, it's not my job to do this labor and fix institutions at the institutional level. Like, that is somebody's job who is like getting paid for to do it. Like, I'm here to learn and get better at my craft. And so I guess like how do you navigate the I guess the being done with labor that isn't your labor to engage in, but also like how do you see your work as a writer in that too?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think something, yeah, that we both have in common is our insistence on community, right? And on equity and inclusion. And I think, yeah, that especially when we were in the MFA program, that was something that's like how we connected, or that was important. I think, and as a woman, I think, or as a woman of color in particular, that's a tricky line of like, where there's a sense of labor, right? Whether it be emotional labor or physical labor or support, there's sense of like, I found myself in situations where I'm just wringing myself dry because I like am doing all this work for everyone around me. And I think it's taken me a long time to like be able to balance, is this worth my time, right? Is this serving me? Also, is this like work that I'm willing to engage with, not only for myself, but for my community? And I think it's particularly difficult in grad school, because we're there, especially in a low residency program, right? Because we're only there 10 days every 6 months and you're gone within 2 years. So it's hard to like build long lasting anything. And I think, that's kind of the point, right? They don't want, like, that's the nature of higher ed. So I think in that it was really important when I came to terms with like what limited power we had in that space. I think I then shifted to, well, yeah, like what you said, like, I'm going to get what I need out of this. I'm going to work with the people that I want to work with. And I'm going to build the relationships and friendships with people that I know we care about the same things and have the same values. And then that's it. Right. So in that way, I feel like I had a really positive experience in our MFA program, because I got what I needed and also like made some deep friendships along the way.
Like us.
Yeah. Like us.
I'm gonna.
Okay.
Go ahead. What are you gonna say?
There's a question from the audience from
Yeah, I
my
was
big
gonna read it.
friend Nikita. Nikita's here. Yay. She says, for both of our amazing poets, I'm curious about their thoughts and relationships with audiences. The vulnerability is so real in their work. How do they navigate audience, familiar and unfamiliar? Do you want to go ahead?
I'm still thinking. Hmm.
Has your family read your work?
Ha, LOL. So, okay, so is this, I guess that's a way to kind of answer this question. So okay, let me read that. The vulnerability is so real. How do you navigate audiences? So I guess like, my audience, so I guess that's like interesting question because like, do you consider your family familiar or unfamiliar, right? And so like for me, and I guess Nikita, I'm curious, like, if you want to like chime in, like, do we consider familiarity like people that we would be like in community with, or do we consider familiarity like the friends that we've built? Like for me, like I would consider you, Tiana, as my familiar rather than like somebody who happens to just be Palestinian. Though I would also consider people who are Palestinian to be my familiars as well. And so by that logic, it's like I have a kind of Venn diagram of familiars. And my family should technically fall into that Venn diagram by some way or another. But I can say for a fact that my mom has opened my book and then multiple times, like, so here's a funny story. This kind of example, we'll give it an example in a nutshell. My mom bought three copies of my book for her friends before the book even came out. And then when I gave them to her, let's just say that it is now 2021. The book came out. Well, I got the first copies of it in February of 2020. And those books have sat in our drawer for about all three books have sat in our drawer for the past like year and a half, I guess. And it's not because we haven't seen anybody. We definitely need to socially distance, that's for sure. But, the other reason is because my mom is like, I don't know what you're saying in your poems. And I'm worried that you're going to embarrass us if I give it to somebody and they're going to ask, what is this? Or what is this story about? And what is this about? And so like, there's this weird dichotomy of like, family obligation and, I guess, keeping up airs for the family in ways that doesn't make my family familiars for my work. And so they, I guess, have attempted to read it. But the only time I've ever had any commentary on my poetry from my family is they're always asking me clarifying questions to make sure that I'm not talking shit about them. So, yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. This question, particularly specifically around family, came up in another reading I did with a friend, Autumn Choi Wild, who's a queer, non-binary Korean American poet, and they said that their mother doesn't read or speak English, so they were like, if their mother had, they weren't sure if they would have written the book or like if they would have written this book, and I thought that was really interesting. Because I think it's with work that's so intimately personal, there is a level of anxiety around like family, engaging with it. But not my adopted family hasn't talked to me about it, and I think at first, yeah, I felt nervous about it, and now I'm like, you know what? Like the whole purpose of the book was to finally take some agency back in this story where I've just been marginalized and silenced over and over and over. So like, I don't really care anymore, right? Like, it would be nice if they read it and like wanted to maybe have a conversation, but if they don't, then like, that's not, then whatever. And though I did do a reading with an adoptee only reading earlier in my virtual tour, and that was really special. I've never been in an adoptee only space like that, and I think, like you were saying, if you were to read in a Palestinian specific space, there's something about just like an understanding that we all just bring to this space that like other people, there doesn't have to be any prefacing, right? Or it's just like, you get it, right? Or like, I don't know, I feel like, yeah, so there's something really special about the safety of that kind of space.
And that's also the weird thing too. And I think, I don't want people to get it twisted. Like, even if I say like my writings for Palestinians, I'm also a Palestinian who grew up in the West. Like, I'm a Palestinian who has access to specific privileges that other people haven't had. And so like, there are gonna be people who like who read my work and they're like they don't fuck with it. Like, sorry if I'm not supposed to swear, they don't F with it because like they're just like, yeah, like of course he can write that. He was alive long enough to write that. You know, I have so many people who I know who have been like killed before they even made it to 20. And so it's like, especially being from Gaza, so it's like in a certain realm, it's like, does my Venn diagram fully extend to the community I wish it would? And the answer is like, no, it can't, because I am allowed to exist in a mode that other people can't. And so I'm curious, you know, for you, for example, like when we talk about being adoptees, like there's always going to be this like weird dichotomy of like, yes, you're an Asian American, but also like there's this wrinkle. Like there's always a wrinkle as to like the privileges we may or may not have. And yeah, I don't know, it's a weird thing
Yeah,
to navigate.
I think similar, you know, and I wish that within that audience of familiars was included like Korean people, right? Or
Right.
Who I don't know how much they really even consider the fact that over 200,000
Right.
of their people have been exported over the past 50 years. Like, I think, you know, being that, yeah. And, you know, Matthew Salesses talks, also a Korean adoptee, but he wrote that book recently, published, called Craft in the Real World. And he talks a lot about audience and like, who are we writing to?
Mm-hmm.
And I think definitely in my first row is other Korean American adoptees. And
Right.
then, you know, when you think about that, like who's next, and like, and you know, we've been forced to read writers that we were not even anywhere in
Right.
this audience, right? So
Yeah.
like, I think, you know, there's always going to be people, and that's exciting too, people that discover our work that like wouldn't necessarily connect with us in a way that we would consider, but like, so
Right.
I think, I guess with Nikita's question, navigating audiences, I guess I feel more nervous about like, I don't know, with people that I really like, with my first row audience. I almost feel more nervous because I really want them to feel, to resonate. I want my work to resonate with them. And with unfamiliar folks, like I'm like, well, here it is. I don't know.
Right. So I think to navigate that and to not hate myself as a writer or a person, I adopted what could be considered a selfish approach to the writing, or at least interpreting the writing. And I guess I'll say this real quick. First, I can't remember who I read this from, but it was like a radio interview on NPR or something like that. And this writer, she was a white woman, and she was saying like, you shouldn't worry about what the people think about your writing, because if they wanted you to write good things about them, they should have treated you better. And I was like, that's very poignant. But the other part of me is like, but like, you know, then you spoke to, you know, you read your poem about your dad. I have a poem about my dad in the book as well. And it's just like, what if they're traumatized? What if like they're navigating all these things that like they don't even know? And so, for example, like one of the things I worry about is somebody will read the poem and be like, oh, I think Chen Chen, also a colleague of ours, talked about this, where it's just like people are always hoping for like this happy ending to the work, or like when navigating your abusers. And it's just like, I don't want y'all to be like, my dad's a shitty person, if you look at the book and be like, that poem was clearly like antagonistic. But it's like, yeah, but there's also beautiful poems in there too. And so the nature of a relationship is so nuanced that I don't want y'all to be like, oh, we read the book that you wrote in 2018 or 2019 that got published in 2020. Are things good with your dad? And I was like, it doesn't matter if they are or they're not. The point
None
of
of
the
your
poem,
business. Like, this is my right? Like,
right?
this is my book, this is my art. Like, yeah, it's hyper personal, but like, who do you think that you are to come up and be like, and like ask me about my family? Like, that's not appropriate.
And that goes back to what I was gonna say about like how I approach the writing. Like for me, I've always told people like, you have to write for yourself first and foremost. And so if your community happens to be people who look like you, that's cool. But like, I don't write for anybody but me. Like I wrote because I'm like, look, that book, How the Water Holds Me, nobody else could have written the poems that I needed to read. And so I wrote them for myself. Like, I don't think it's narcissistic of me to say like, there weren't works that existed that moved me in ways that my own writing was able to move me. And then I share for others. So like the goal of writing for me is for me to stay alive. My writing is for me to be able to process things. It's for the catharsis. It's for me to exist and live another day. And then I share though because I have the audacity to believe that something in my work will resonate to somebody else. And it's not because I'm Palestinian or Palestinian American or like male or Arab or whatever. It's because I believe that by being true to myself in the writing, there are threads that other people can connect to. Like, for example, you mentioned the family stuff, right? Like, there are things that other people can connect to, not because of our shared identities, but because there are things, there's a rawness and a truth to the words that are being spoken and shared that by writing for myself first and foremost, I have wrote the most authentic thing I can write. And by sharing that authentic thing, I'm hopefully tapping into the authenticities of other people. So like when I talk about, a strife with my father or a fight with my brother, that's allowed to happen because other people have fights with their siblings and their parents. And they also have healthy relationships with their siblings and their parents, or they don't have healthy relationships with their siblings and parents.
And life is complex and
Exactly.
nuanced, right? And like kind of one of the purposes of poetry, I think, is to really hone in on and elevate or like highlight and illustrate maybe like one tiny feeling, right? But or like not tiny, but like to really articulate what's going on in this one moment. And you have to take that within this like wide breadth of feeling and life and complexity. And and I just feel like people that try to diminish that or dismiss it and just look at like that one line where we had a fight, it's like I don't have
you're reading for the wrong reasons at that point. Like you're not reading for the right
like they're reading for the gossip, not for the
Exactly.
Anyway, I think we might be out of time.
Well, I wanted to close it out with like a cool question. And you mentioned like we wouldn't write about flowers, but it's like, what if we did? Like if you could write about anything, like what are like one of the few things that it's just like, I've always tried to write about this thing, but I can't pull myself to do it. And like I've always tried to be like, for example, I like try to write funny poems. Not really doing great at it. What is a thing that like you would love to before the end of your writing life be able to like write towards or about? And it can be deep as heck if you want it to be, but like what is just to close things out.
That's a great question. I mean, I love to laugh. And there have been a couple of times where I've read a poem and it elicited laughter, not on purpose, but it did. And it just like, but it like delighted me. Like I loved that I made people laugh. And I think being able to do that intentionally would be cool. I don't know. What about you?
I just want to be Matthew Olsman.
Yeah, Matthew, but he's funny. I mean, he's funny and deep and clever. Yeah, Matthew Olsman's the best.
Yeah. But yeah, we're over time, I guess. But thank you, Tiana, for having me and for creating the work that you did. Y'all better buy Cleve, like for real. Tell your friends.